World of Warcraft's new expansion, The War Within, has been out for a couple weeks now, and with enough time passed and thoughts written down about the new expansion, I am now able to give a clear statement on if it is actually the best time to get into the game. If you haven't played WoW for a long time, you probably heard pretty good feedback all over the internet about the game. And if you haven't played WoW ever, you also probably heard a lot of things about the new expansion and how it saved World of Warcraft for the 50th time now. Blizzard really gave their all when it came to promoting the new expansion. You constantly saw it on YouTube. I even saw it on mainstream television once, which was very unexpected, honestly. And if these positive news revitalized your interest in getting back into the game or starting completely new, you probably also thought to yourself that you're just too far behind and that it would take ages to catch up with all these veterans that started 20 years ago. Can I just jump into the game and understand what's going on in the story, and will it take me several hundred hours of play to even get to the current content? That's the question I want to talk about today and try and give you a satisfying answer.
And since we're talking about starting something new, what if I told you you can learn how to code and have an actual blast while doing so? The sponsor of today's video, Boot.dev, does just that by teaching you backend development from scratch in the Python and Go programming languages, while also being fun. The creators knew that many people become very bored very quickly by plain and simple coding, myself included back when I was in school. And the smartest way to learn it was to make it fun, which is why they mixed that with the fun and entertaining aspects of an RPG. You can earn XP, level up, get achievements, complete numerous quests, and try and reach a top spot on the global leaderboard while learning how to write code. If you ever struggle to understand something in your own code, you can ask their very own AI, Boots, who will actually ask you questions about your problem instead of handing you the answers immediately. That way you can find a solution for yourself, making future similar situations much better to understand. If you're still on the fence about trying to get into coding yourself, Boot.dev also has a 30-day no questions asked refund policy and a free demo of every course and its interactive features. Additionally, you can click on the link in the description and use my code Varian to get 25% off your first month or year, depending on your subscription plan, of course. So as you can see, you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. Thank you to Boot.dev for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to WoW.
Let's just start with the story. World of Warcraft has been out for exactly 20 years now, and in these 20 years Blizzard added so many stories packed into the original version and 10 additional expansions after that. But do I need to play through these old stories to get the storyline of The War Within? No. You don't, since the story of the previous expansions are actually not that important. In fact, they aren't relevant at all, and those small bits and pieces of story you would need to understand what's going on in The War Within are packed into a little catch-up recap video that will play once you open up the game for the first time. And honestly, it does a pretty good job summarizing the story for new players. Unlike in games like Final Fantasy XIV, the story doesn't build up on itself. These expansions are usually always a completely separate story and become obsolete once it's over. The War Within opened a new chapter for WoW and the dev team because they decided to start a completely new method of content release and storytelling called the World Soul Saga, which is a multi-expansion storyline set to play out over 3 successive expansions, which have already been announced. The War Within, the expansion we're in right now, followed by Midnight, and The Last Titan. So, as you can see, the World Soul Saga is a self-contained storyline, and we're just at the beginning of it all, and there isn't anything you missed at all, since you will experience 90% of it while questing through the MSQ. Why 90% and not 100%? Well, the other 10% are just small side notes about existing characters in the story, which have been built and expanded on over the years, but honestly, nothing major that you're missing. And for everyone that was disappointed in the stories from previous expansions, is the story finally good again? Well, take it from someone who usually doesn't give a shit about storylines in games. Someone who always skips cutscenes and just wants to get through the MSQ so he can do his endgame content. That when I say the story is very interesting and very well done, it probably really is interesting and very well done. I have to admit that I caught myself watching the cutscenes throughout my first time questing through the War Within campaign a lot of times, which never happened in my 17 years of playing. The storyline is such a big difference and improvement to past expansion stories, and the origin story of the main antagonist of the World Soul Saga is also very compelling, cool, and interesting. Unlike BFA stories, for example, where the whole premise of the story was that the Alliance and Horde were mad at each other for no reason at all again, and whatever Shadowlands was supposed to be. The War Within story is actually very well written, and they put a lot of thought behind it while developing it. The characters don't feel dull, except Anduin. He's still a whining little crybaby. But other than that, every character has something interesting about themselves, and they are adding a lot to the main story. Even the side stories are interesting, especially the ones where you finally team up with the kobolds you used to beat up in Classic and help them get their candles back. and much more. Some of these side characters are so well written where you might think that these were originally supposed to be integrated into the main story. I mentioned earlier that previous expansion stories become obsolete once new expansions release, but they are not permanently gone. If you're interested in past storylines, you can always talk to Chromie, who you can find in Orgrimmar or Stormwind right here, and level through all the old zones and storylines to understand and see what happened back then. But as I said, these storylines aren't mandatory and won't be needed for understanding what's happening now in the current content. So on the one hand, you have your current storyline with Xel'Tath and her power-driven madness, or you can just lay back in Pandaria and experience the Pandaren and their heritage and storylines by questing through the zones on one of your alts. If you played WoW in the past, you should know that leveling felt awful, except the last 10 levels. This has now been mostly fixed, and you don't have that weird feeling anymore that you get weaker and weaker with every level until you get stronger and stronger in your last 10 levels. Before you enter the World of Warcraft though, you will need to pick your race and class. On the left side are the races of the Alliance, and on the right side are the races of the Horde. Even though back then there was a clear distinction and separation in player bases depending on which faction you chose, this is no longer the case. At least not really. If you're playing with a friend and he wants to play a human very badly, but you want to play a blood elf, you will still be able to play together eventually. The only things that are still separated, which I honestly don't get why Blizzard just doesn't remove it at this point, is the leveling journey in the open world and queued content. So dungeons in the Dungeon Finder tab, for example. Other than that, you will be able to play with your friends from other factions with no problems at all, once you get into endgame content like raiding and Mythic Plus or Delves, which I will get to later. For new players, I would always recommend you to play through the tutorial zone, Exile's Reach, where you get taught the very basics of the game. This is also where you will understand simple game mechanics and systems, and it should give you a pretty good overview on what you should expect from this game. If you hated leveling in the past and just want to get to endgame, you can also make use of the 20th anniversary event that is currently going on, where you can get an XP buff that reaches to an absurd 75% XP boost if you're able to collect every buff available for you. You're wondering if you can actually play all the classes and specializations a class can offer. You can trust me when I say that this is one of the most balanced expansions in a while. No class is truly bad and no class is truly insane to a point where you won't be taken to a group content if you don't play that certain class. Alright, once you reach max level, it's time to do endgame content. What content does exist in endgame and is it fun? The endgame content currently is very fun and very diverse. The endgame has probably never been this diverse and content rich before. You will always find something to do, and if you're ever bored of one thing, you can instantly jump over to do the other thing. Obviously, there's the main endgame content like raiding and Mythic Plus dungeons. If you don't know, Mythic Plus are endlessly scaling dungeons similar to Greater Rifts if you played Diablo before, where you need to complete the dungeon in a certain amount of time in order to get great rewards and better ratings. Nerubar Palace, the new raid, is also very enjoyable. Well designed, and it's a lot of fun. The bosses aren't pushover meat sacks you can kill by ignoring the mechanics. They have interesting and fun mechanics actually, and the vibes you get from the raid are also very spot on. But what if you don't want to play with other players? What if you want to do solo content? Well, there's a ton of solo content you can do. The recently added Delves system has got a lot of positive feedback from the community, especially more casual players that maybe don't have the time or interest in playing with other players. Delves are a short form instance dungeon that you can either run solo or up to a group of 5 people. Obviously, the content will then scale to your group size, so you won't be able to blast through them by just taking 5 people with you, and you won't be totally demolished if you go in there on your own. These delves usually take you around 10 to 20 minutes, and the best part about it is that unlike Mythic Plus dungeons, delves don't have any time limits, no matter the difficulty level, allowing players to progress at their own pace and take the time if needed. There are many different delves spread around the zones of the War Within, and they are all different from each other. Some require you to save kobolds from Nerubians, some need you to solve some puzzles, and some just need you to kill certain amounts of enemies to progress to the end. The rewards you get from these delves are also not useless. Besides cosmetic items, you can also get up to heroic grade level gear, giving you the possibility to gear up your character to a point where you will not be behind people that only do Mythic Plus or raids all the time. Besides all this stuff, there's always the collecting part of the game. There are dozens of mounts and pets you can collect, which are spread around the world. You can check out my channel and you will find a few videos about some easy mounts you can just collect in a few hours if you're interested in that. Now, as I mentioned, there are also pets in the game. Not just pets that follow you around looking cute and adorable, but there's also a Pokemon-like combat system where you can battle trainers around the world and fight against other players and their lineup of battle pets. If you played Pokemon before, this feature will probably catch your attention. I'm pretty sure. It is very well done and polished, and it can be very fun if you're into that stuff. But that's not all. You can also run old raids and collect old armor sets and transmog them to look like this. Beautiful, I know. Speaking of fighting other players, obviously there's PvP in the game, in all sorts of forms. You can PvP in the open world, you can queue up into a 2v2 arena, a 3v3 arena, or even into a battleground, where whole raid groups fight against each other and try to win. If you're coming from games like Black Desert Online or the recently released Throne and Liberty game, you should try out some PvP and tell me how you liked it in the comments below. There's also role-playing in the game. This is also the old-friendliest expansion ever, with the addition of the warband system making almost all your progression account-wide. You can share currencies, share reputation, and send over gear and gold across all your characters, no matter what faction or server they are in. You also level faster now. Significantly faster. Every time you reach max level with a character, you get an experience boost for future characters to up to 25% after reaching a 5th character to level 80. This isn't everything, I'm still not done. You can do tons more stuff like reputation farming, professions, gold farming, exploring secret areas in the game, you name it. There's also so much to do, and the game never forces you to do any of it. You can create your own world and play however you want to play. If you hated the systems in BFA and Shadowlands where you needed to do stuff like Torghast to even be considered to be taken to a raid or dungeon, The War Within will be a breath of fresh air, since you're free to do whatever you want to do, just how a good MMO should be. Beginning with Dragonflight, the last expansion, me as a player had the feeling that the developers are actually starting to listen to player feedback and adjust their game accordingly to our wishes. If you quit a while ago and thought about getting back into it again, do it now. And I promise you, you will feel welcomed by Blizzard and you will feel the difference to earlier expansions. To all of you that never touched WoW, you will have a great time in this world and have a lot of fun playing it for the first time. Especially if you can gather up some friends that can experience it with you. Don't listen to all the doomers that say WoW is dead and it's complicated to get into it. The game has its flaws, yes, but is it unplayable for a new player? Absolutely not. If you give the game an actual unbiased chance and commit to learning the mechanics, you will do absolutely fine and you will get better over time. That's just how a game works. Anyways, that's my thoughts on it for now. If I was able to convince you to begin, I want to give you a few tips on your journey. Click on this video right here if you want 15 tips which are essential for new players. You can also check out my Discord and maybe find some new players to link up and experience the world with. That's it from me, and I wish you a great day and a fantastic start into The War Within.